colleague Parikshit Luthra, who is with Anish Shah, the MD and CEO at M&M.
The G20 summit has ended with a consensus on the Delhi Declaration. The G20 noted that the uneven recovery will need well-calibrated macroeconomic and structural policies. The declaration said that the private enterprise had a critical role in accelerating growth and driving sustainable economic transformation. The G20 also reiterated commitment to take action to take up sustainable finance and also committed to bigger, better and more effective MDBs. The Global Biofuel Alliance and the inclusion of Africa Union were important aspects of the G20 declaration. We're now joined by the Managing Director of the Mahindra Group, Anish Shah. Mr. Shah, thank you very much for joining us. We were able to build consensus on the declaration after very ruthless negotiations, if I were to quote Amitabh Kant. It all went down to the wire. Finally, India, with the help of emerging economies like South Africa, Indonesia and Brazil, was able to drive consensus. What does this say and how does this help India's image as a destination to do business?
Parikshit, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I think this is a key milestone for India. G20 was extremely well organized through its entire duration. The scale was unprecedented, with meetings across 50 cities with various different groups that were set up. Focus on a very large number of areas that are important for the world. And then as we look at the culmination, the very fact that India has taken the lead in being inclusive globally and at the same time being able to forge a consensus in a world that is highly fragmented today really speaks volumes about India's leadership. The other part that I'd highlight before we get into the details is that India really led by talking about purpose and shared values. And that is very welcome in a world that has become an increasingly difficult world to really highlight the importance of purpose and shared values.
Right. There was also conversation about driving private capital. The G20 declaration noted the critical role of private enterprise in accelerating growth and driving sustainable economic transformation, and also their role in MDBs, how MDBs can leverage the private sector in driving up sustainable financing. What are some of the pillars of support that the private sector would need on this front, according to you? What are the gaps that you see in India and worldwide?
So on this, Parikshit, the clause that you quoted, clause 17, is an important one because it really changes the tone that had been set in the past, even in many climate conversations, that governments around the world were responsible for solving everything. And while governments do have a critical role to play, I do believe that the private sector has to partner with governments to lead changes and to help overall from a sustainability standpoint. We've been doing that for a long time at the Mahindra Group, and we've had various partners around the World Economic Forum in particular as well, where we've seen leadership that we provided, that India has provided in this space. And therefore, the partnership between the government and the private sector is important. There are multiple other areas also that have been outlined in the charter, or in the declaration rather, that highlight the importance of the private sector playing a role, not just in sustainability, but in many other areas of economic growth, in resilient supply chains, for example. And these are areas that we will work with the government on. I wouldn't say at this point, here are things we need from the government. I think it is about the private sector stepping up and playing the role that it has to.
The inclusion of African Union at the insistence of India was a very important aspect. Many of the problems, including debt restructuring, debt vulnerabilities, relate to African countries. Now, India has significant business interests in Africa. It is the big market. How important do you see this for the Indian economy and the Mahindra Group? Does the Mahindra Group see this as a business opportunity for the future, considering this may bring India much closer to the African Union?
So this is big for the Indian economy. From a Mahindra Group standpoint, lots of positives, and I'll get into the details there as well. But before I do that, it also, again, highlights India's leadership in being inclusive. India hosted about 125 developing countries at the Voice of Global South Summit in January. And that is what eventually led to the call and admission of 54 African nations. So that positions India very well on the world stage. Specifically with regard to the economy, India today is the fifth largest investor in Africa, with 74 billion in cumulative investments. India's relationship also includes about 90 billion in trade and 12 billion US dollars in lines of credit. There are multiple resources, minerals that India sources from Africa, and this relationship will really cement India's trade with African countries that will be very positive for our economy.
Right.
From a Mahindra Group standpoint, South Africa has been a very key market for us for automotive. We are ramping up our automotive play in that market, especially after the successes we've seen in India. And with multiple other businesses in hospitality, in tractors, in real estate, we're looking at opportunities across Africa. And we feel that will be an important market for us in future.
Right. You consider this to be an important market in the future. Would also like to speak to you about the Global Biofuel Alliance. Some countries have joined the Global Biofuel Alliance. Others are yet to come on board. How do you see this as an opportunity for the industry, for the Mahindra Group?
I think this is one, again, that is an important step from a sustainability standpoint. I do feel there's still a lot more work to be done on this front. And for us, at this point, we are a lot more focused from an electric vehicle standpoint as well. So we are looking at it closely in terms of what are the specific opportunities. And I think there are some other areas where it will benefit us.
Right. I want to ask you about some of the points related to the uneven economic recovery that we're seeing around the world. This was also noted in the G20 declaration that we would have to implement well-calibrated macroeconomic and structural policies. Global economic growth is below its long-term average and remains uneven as well. When it comes to exports from India, how do you see the global economic environment right now? Because the G20 deliberated on it in a great deal, also because of the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war. Give us a sense of the global environment, how you see it, and how could it impact growth?
The global environment is actually far better than what we had expected it to be a few months ago. And in conversations with various global peers in both the US and Europe, we are seeing a far greater degree of resilience in their economies. And that is something that augurs well for us. That said, inflation hasn't gone away as yet. There are still significant challenges, and there is an expectation of a further slowdown. And that is something that we should brace ourselves for, that will impact India. With regard to the Indian economy, we see tremendous strength at this point across all the industries that we operate in. And we really haven't seen any negative effects of the slight increases in interest rates, etc. So I think India will continue to be the shining spot. We will face some challenges as we see some potential slowdown. But overall, we are in a much better position than we had expected to be a few months ago.
Right. There was a significant meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. In fact, it is said that President Biden played a big role in helping the G7 come to a consensus on the declaration as well, considering that the Prime Minister had a 50-minute meeting and there were a lot of deliverables from that meeting, including on defense, on renewable infrastructure. India also inviting President Biden to join the Quad Summit in India next year. We're hoping that he would be the chief guest for the Republic Day. Closer India-US ties, how does this translate for business interests in India? Do you consider ramping up investments, ramping up your forays into the United States, considering the momentum in ties over the past few months?
We have been in the United States for a long time. Our tractor business has been there for over 25 years. IT services is a significant player. In auto, we've got some presence as well with off-road vehicles. So we've had a good amount of investment in the US, but this is something that is a significant step up from where we've been before. We've never seen India-US relationships be so close. And this is something, even in discussions with the US Commerce Secretary or various senators, we really feel that there is a high degree of keenness from their side, and so is it from our side, to be able to do a lot more. So it's not just about investments that we would have from the US into India and India into the US, but it's also going to be about partnerships that we put together. It's about creating resilient supply chains in India for US companies. It's about technology partnerships that will take us to the next level on the global stage. So I think there's just tremendous potential here. And with much stronger ties, I feel it is something that will strengthen the Indian economy and Indian companies.
Okay, well, that's a discussion you'd want to hear again. So through the course of the day, you'll hear snippets of that. Let's take a short break. We'll get back to the market.